Welcome to Non-Productive. It's the podcast you're listening to right now. I'm Frank. Why do we ever do introductions? Do you think anybody ever cares?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Huh?
Do you care? If you care, leave a comment on this podcast any possible way. Or tweet us, leave a message, something. Reach out to us in some way and say you want to know who was demanding your attention during the start of the show.
You won't.
The answer is Frank. I'm Frank. I'm joined in studio, as often, by Pete, Al, Michelle, and James. And we're talking about what we talk about every week, villains.
Yes.
I was going to say pop culture, that I reconsidered it, and I was like, no, let's do this. Villains. We are doing villain redemptions. Al, can you walk us through why you've been like a dog with a bone on this? That was your customary start of show cough. Go on.
So pretty much, I've been on this ever since we had an article shared to the Fam Club talking about why Kylo Ren's redemption arc doesn't quite work or hold up. And it's gotten me thinking, like, man, when does it work? And when doesn't it work? Why do we accept sometimes when villains come to the table with, like, either, an apology or, like, realizing once and for all, oh, I was the bad guy all along, or something, like, why does it sometimes, like, ring entirely false, and other times, like, oh, no, we're on your side. Mm-hmm. Like, you can come along here and join the good guys and pal around.
And as you said, Al, the thing that started all of this was an article about Kylo Ren, who is a character in the latest Star Wars trilogy, who may or may not have had a redemption arc. I think we are going to spoil everything we talk about. We'll say what it is before we talk about it. But
so you can turn off.
Yes. Why are you so obsessed with people turning off this podcast? Are you working for a rival podcast? If so, can you give me a job at this rival podcast?
I'm pretty sure that's the first time I mentioned it.
No, I think you've said that several times in the past. Maybe?
Maybe.
I don't know.
Not today.
To be honest, certainly. I turn off the podcast whenever you start talking, so I don't know.
Is Pete the villain?
Yeah.
Definitely, without a question.
And this is his redemption arc.
So
I'm the hero of my story, Dan.
So spoiler alerts for Star Wars all the way up inclusive. Kylo Ren may or may not have a redemption arc, there were air quotes on that, in the latest trilogy, at the close of the latest trilogy. It depends on how you interpret that last movie. And Vader definitely does, and people seem to be more upset about Kylo Ren's redemption arc versus Vader's. So let's spend some time on that, shall we?
I think it's hard, right? So if you look at the original trilogy with Darth Vader... right? We only have Vader as kind of this ominous figure. We're kind of insinuated that Vader has done,
horrible things,
large-scale atrocities, but we don't get to experience any of them personally.
Yeah.
So when he, at the end, saves his son in a personal effort by stopping the Emperor and coincidentally helping save the galaxy, we tend to give him the benefit of the doubt. We've got a lot of...
For the first three movies, all you see him do is fight other soldiers. He's a bad guy.
The worst you can accuse him of is standing by and not doing anything when Tarkin vaporizes Alderaan.
Right, that's the big one. And I'm glad you brought it up, because I'm sure listeners are going like, what do you mean he didn't do anything? But I think that may be too big of a thing. Like, it's just an entire planet blows up. Yeah. It may not be directly his...
Yeah,
it's a very nebulous thing to have happen. You can sort of like just brush around, like, was he involved? How was he?
And I think what's very important is also most of us have watched the original trilogy as children, and in the same way that you've got kids dressing as Kylo Ren right now going like, yeah, no problem. They're not thinking about that. He was kind of abusive to his girlfriend, or because it's not in their vocabulary yet. It's not they're not thinking about it.
Right.
Whereas Kylo Ren.
Well, I was going to say things get a little more complicated for Vader.
Yes,
right.
You're right.
So George Lucas does the prequels, and we don't have anything in the first two movies. In Revenge of the Sith, we pretty much see him go, I'm going to go murder a bunch of young Jedi children, and that's pretty high up there.
Don't forget the Attack of the Clones genocide.
Yeah, there's also the Tusken Raiders. Yeah, he starts doing things that are more quite obviously horrible, right? You don't see a group of, I killed the women and the children, even, is I think what he says about the Tusken Raiders. That's never suggested in the original trilogy that Vader was like, well, I was looking for people and I killed everyone in Cloud City to look for you. No, that's just that,
Yeah. And also we forget, like, he is somewhat responsible for the death of his wife.
Sure, there's that as well.
Also kind of, like, it's a lot to take in on that character, like, in a weird way, post-mortem. Mm-hmm. Like, past the character's, like, actual death in the original trilogy, and us already accepting that Vader had his comeback, and now it's new information on how bad he is. How comfortable are we with that? Can we retroactively take that back? Is that
for whatever reason, for me, and I think for a lot of people, although not for everyone, it doesn't spoil things because because of the amount of time. It was decades before we found out the additional information. Even seeing like young Anakin as a Force ghost at the end always kind of felt weird in ways that are kind of hard to describe. Some of it's the expressions and the act and whatever.
Yeah.
But it makes you feel like, this is the guy who did some really shady things. The old guy, he didn't do anything. He was just an old guy who choked a few soldiers. Wow, that's dark. But okay, yeah.
See, I actually I came at this from the perspective of being raised Catholic.
Okay.
And this made perfect sense. The whole Darth Vader arc made perfect sense to me because according to Catholic faith, you can basically do anything in life. And if you truly repent on your deathbed, you're considered to be redeemed.
Right.
Which seems to be what happens with Vader.
And I'm going to piggyback on that as a narrative tool, and it's also going to play into, if we can jump over to Kylo Ren, is death is a big narrative tool to help with that redemption idea.
Redemption equals death.
Well, or just the idea that you are more redeemable in your final act if it costs you everything. Right?
Yeah.
That you can give up all of yourself for specific actions, and that adds to it. It also eases us, I think, as viewers or watchers or intakers of that media, if, Kylo Ren isn't able to, at the end, go off and pal around with, Rey and Poe and them. He's like, yeah, so guys, wasn't this great? We were friends the whole time.
The whole thing before. And that's actually one of the things that, some movies, when they do it, it's so powerful. Black Panther, to spoil Civil War a little bit, Black Panther saving Zemo. Right?
Yeah.
He's saying, no, you have to pay for this. You don't get to just die and be done with this. Yeah. The living still are not done with you yet. That's a really powerful thing. And I want to address some things that the listeners might be focusing on right now. In terms of death, whether or not it really does redeem you for whatever, that's the question we're not going to answer. And that little kind of sneaky way of saying it, truly repentive, right? That's the thing where you can never really, that's up for God to know, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
And God isn't the audience of these stories, we are. So please don't sample that at all. But anyways, God isn't the audience of this story. We are, so it's entirely possible to see a character die, give the ultimate sacrifice, and be truly repetitive and look at them like, I don't believe it.
I don't buy it.
That might be a failure of the filmmaker or whatever who doesn't express it.
I think there are ways to craft the story in a way that you get the sense that character is truly repenting.
Yeah, and that's what we're going to be talking about.
Like Vader's actions before his death, turning on the Emperor, you can argue about how effective it works narratively, but
now, yes,
it's clearly an attempt at doing that.
So let's go in a little bit into Kylo Ren.
Yeah, so I think Kylo Ren has kind of the opposite problem that Vader has. In the movies, he's made out to be this bad guy, right? He, from the beginning, we talk about how he turned on the Jedi Temple that Luke was raising, how he was involved in the killing of all of the people. We see that moment in The Last Jedi where, theoretically he snaps and he's supposed to, he's given it all up.
We see the horrible acts he does. He does it in media, in the original story we're watching.
Right. They have tried to backpedal that a little bit using other media. I know, Frank, you're pretty famous for saying, if it's not in the main
So
stuff.
let's not even address it. I know in the book something probably we found out he was being manipulated by the... right? That's
exactly.
Be it, right?
It's all that sort of stuff. He's manipulated by this. He didn't actually kill all those people. He was just there.
If anything, that makes it worse. It just feels like you're defanging agency from a character that did the things that they did. And that's stuff that people in the real world do all the time when they're being bad people. They say, you don't understand. I was being influenced by things. I couldn't help it. This is just the way boys will be boys.
I'll use the phrase you were looking for. I was just following orders.
Yes, just following orders.
So we don't get any of that sort of. I don't know. I feel like with Kylo Ren, we don't get what you said. We don't get that moment of
genuine.
I can kind of agree. I'd say taking that a step forward, I think there are moments where we see Kylo trying to, fight it. I don't think we ever actually get that moment where he truly does.
He certainly seems to waver in his conviction, right, through all the movies.
One thing he's got against him in a redemption arc that Vader didn't have is he's got a depth of character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely true.
Vader was a monolithic evil.
That was part of the character.
We got no story behind him. We didn't know any of his motivations. We had all this explanation about why Kylo was doing what he was doing, what he thought his justifications were. So, knowing all that, we never get him overcoming any of that or seeming to be sorry for what he did.
So since we're missing these scenes, because even when he goes and gives his life up to save Rey, he doesn't ever get that scene that Vader has at the end where he's talking to Luke and being like, "I'm gonna die." I just go. He sort of has that moment where he doesn't say he's sorry, but how could you? But you get it is an apology in a way, and Kylo kind of doesn't get that, and I don't.
Yeah. I don't quite agree with this, and I think we've gone around in a circle to say that this is a nuanced topic, but especially with this character. So full disclosure, I actually don't mind Kylo Ren's quote redemption arc. The reason why I kept saying I don't know if he is redeemed because I think it's nebulous, and that's great because he vanishes like a Jedi, which isn't really all we know about what I guess Sith blow up. But he vanishes like a Jedi, but he doesn't become a Force ghost. We don't see him sort of hanging out with aunt and uncle, or mom and uncle, in heaven, Force, space, whatever. We don't know what happens. Is he truly, is there a redemption arc? I think it's much more obvious. I think the crimes of Kylo Ren are much more visceral. Kills your father, assaults a woman, a prisoner.
Yeah.
And kills villagers. And then maybe also kills a star system. Although, to be blunt, that's equally big for me that I forgot it the same way.
It's the same sort
I forgot about.
And once again, he didn't pull the trigger on that one.
Yeah. But the point is, I think that's the thing that makes people angry. I mean, literally, you read people's reactions are, he had her chained to a desk and was manipulating her mind.
Yep.
That's messed up. And Vader never really, you don't see Vader abusing his son. You don't see him doing traditional child abuse to Luke, and
even
then
when he has Leia, he doesn't really the worst that happens is she gets a truth serum one time, which is still bad.
We
but
also
it's
don't
not
know, he doesn't know it's his daughter, and she's a prisoner, and blah blah blah.
There's There's a very different relationship that he has, even for the people that are his prisoners, and it's not. He at no point does the things that Ren does. Not saying that we have to all of a sudden beat up Ren here, because I think you're right about the redemption arc.
Right.
Is that it may not even qualify for this because maybe he doesn't, and it's not necessarily so that story is good in its own way, but just not this.
The point is that this is an interesting topic, and it's not just these two Star Wars characters. There's about a billion.
It is really interesting that Kylo's solution to every moral problem that he finds is kill your father figure.
Well, you got to do what you got to do. All right, so let's go down our list. I guess we're going to pick this randomly because we did not discuss this beforehand. Let's go right into, we brought up the Marvel movies, so let's talk about Loki, right? Loki is a problem. Loki starts off as an interesting, nuanced villain in Thor, and clearly he graduates to big leagues when he makes it to the Avengers. And then suddenly he becomes, what? Cute?
Narratively, Loki's really interesting because of so many external factors, right? I can't discredit the way the Marvel movies are made in this equation here, right? He's introduced as a villain in Thor. He's a breakout character, so they're bring him back for the Avengers. So Joss Whedon is sure, but he's the villain, right?
Well,
so they bring him back, and he's the main villain for the Avengers. Blah, 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 Thanos pulling the strings. And then they're but he's still around, so you got to bring him back for Thor 2. And then in Thor 2, they're kind of well, you know what? Who's got great chemistry together? Tom Hiddleston and Chris Hemsworth. And then it's wacky hijinks.
By the time we get to Thor Ragnarok, it is buddy cop.
Full-on buddy cop.
Yeah.
But I'll argue about Thor 2 a little bit, though, is that it isn't necessarily wacky hijinks in that film. It is a lot of them not necessarily trying to redeem Loki in the eyes of everything he's done, but they try to repair the relationship that Thor has with him.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily a redemption arc in a weird way, if that makes sense.
No, I don't know about that. I think Thor Dark World is that kind of blind spot that justifies Loki's arc towards redemption, because in that movie, Loki is dealing with being a prisoner, is dealing with the angst of losing his mother. He's realizing that, like, basically before this movie, he is a spoiled little kid who wanted to be king, kind of, and then he would do anything for power, and he in league with whatever those aliens were from Avengers, trying to do all that stuff. But by this movie, he kind of feels that there are consequences to what you do.
I think my problem, though, is the end of that movie. He tricks Thor into thinking he's dead, right? He kind of redeems himself in Thor's eyes, and then he goes and imprisons his father so that he can be king.
I'll say this. One, I don't think Odin was a good guy.
No.
I didn't say that.
And
but
I think he also said, you know what? I'm sending him on Earth, his little dream state.
By the time we get to... We never see Loki imprison Odin at all.
I guess.
And by the time we get to Ragnarok, Ragnarok.
Yeah.
It's implied that Odin was in on it, that Odin wanted to leave.
I think it was one of those things where Odin is so powerful and wise and such a smug bastard that
he
he would be like, I knew you were going to be.
Or like, you do know I could come back.
But the thing is did Loki do a bad job as like a king and leader?
Yes, he did.
It was a horrible job.
Oh, actually, yeah.
make that
They
why?
do that in Act 1 of
plays.
Ragnarok. They mention about how oh my God,
He just looked like he just wants attention.
No, but like in Thor Ragnarok, they go on about how the other realms have gone in disarray because Loki hasn't done anything. Their realms have not been defended, and he's just kind of kept everybody there. And
So
just
I think tonally, the movie's changed so much by the time you get to Ragnarok. Like, his villainy is like a comic villain. I don't think we have many examples in our list today, which we have to get to, that are lots of comic villains, because those can fluctuate and be fine.
Yeah.
With Loki, I traditionally, I would agree with most people, and that horrible kind of in the fiction, like, oh, the staff is affecting him. That's why he did the Battle of New York. That's why he did Avenger stuff. I don't like that kind of stuff. He was bad because he made bad decisions. He seemed like he was stuck, that he had to do this in a way.
But he also reveled in it. He enjoyed it.
He also enjoyed. Yeah, I think he would have loved to be king of Earth just to prove that he could of Midgard. But I think there is a bit of redemption in there, more than people let on. And I think a lot of it comes into a movie that people don't like as much, Dark World.
Yep. But I want to say, like, it does still work. Like, we sit here and we can complain about, like, how there are little slight issues with it, but the public always is just kind of behind Loki's side, and I think it has nothing to do with the films. I think it just has to do with Tom Hiddleston.
Sure. I think the same argument can be made for Kylo Ren.
Yeah, I mean,
I think a lot of people, Raylos, will forgive him because he's a dreamboat.
Because Adam Driver is really attractive.
and he does a good job in the movies.
No, how? Why?
Subjectively,
all
he
of his
is.
characters are terrible.
No, objectively.
Like, if you see it, all the other people that he
Speaking
plays
of characters
as,
that are terrible, let's keep it in the Marvel universe. Let's go through the X-Men. We're going to focus on the comics, but we're going to talk. It'll drift.
So is there an X-Men that doesn't fall in this category?
Literally every X-Men villain is this character. Let's start with, who should we start with?
Magneto. Let's begin at the beginning.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah. Magneto, I think, at one point became more complex when they modified his backstory as being a prisoner of a real world, basically a Holocaust survivor. And once that happened, he became a much more interesting villain and character. And I think he's always been on the line one way or another.
But he always had a point, and I think that was what made it easier for him to toe that line. Even if you didn't agree with what his solution was, his methods were not good. His ideals were good in the idea of, like, well, I want freedom for mutants. I want them to be free of oppression, but the only way I'm going to be able to do that is if I, like, I declare war on actual humanity. You, as humans, we kind of arguably don't like that.
I mean, Magneto's philosophy was that mutants are superior to humans and deserve to rule the world, and should do so by force.
Yeah. So they're
that was the original.
And it carries on in most of the versions. It's not just that we need to protect ourselves. It's a step forward. It's the we should be in charge. It's almost not learning the lessons of oppression and deciding instead I should impress others,
Like
oppress
Savage.
others. Yeah,
Or learning the wrong
Yeah.
lessons, as it were.
yeah. So
He,
I don't know. I think
I mean, his viewpoint gradually evolved to like a less evil kind of. We don't need to wipe out humans or take over the Earth. We can just live separate from them. Like we'll go off onto our own asteroid and form our own society and just leave them alone.
yeah. But if you threaten us at all, then we are
Yeah.
going to destroy you as an.
Like
Because
you,
we
you
can.
leave us alone and we'll leave you alone.
Yeah.
Kind of thing, which is
It's hard for me to
defensible, I guess. But
Yeah. So I think the thing with Magneto is that he has a complex viewpoint that makes it harder to ever say you were wrong. But I would not go as far as to say he was redeemed. I think as long as he stays Magneto, he's still kind of a villain.
I think something that helps us too is depending on what story, what movie, what comic, whatever you're watching, there's obviously that underlying idea that him and Charles or him and the good guys used to be friends, or that they've teamed up together, or that they've done things that have bettered the world. So it's not redeemed, particularly because comics are like, always going forever.
That's
but
true.
it's like Magneto is on this and a lot of the X-Men fall here is on this ever tipping scale of conflict, and that it's, how much good and how much bad, and they'll get weighed when they, cross the river.
And there are times where he goes way over on the other end of that, where he leads the X-Men in Xavier's absence, and like despite it being against his philosophies, and just being like, nope, I'm a good guy for now, and I'm gonna follow Charles's example, even though I don't agree with it.
So yeah, Michelle, were you trying to say something?
So I feel like part of it has to do with some of his intentions as Magneto weren't necessarily wrong. Just even I'm thinking back to like the first terrible movie. Actually, no, the first one was good. Everything after that.
the first terrible movie was 3.
Okay, yeah. First, 1 and 2 were 2 was in which his main reasoning behind his actions were because the non-mutant humans wanted to control the mutants, in which like I can see his rationale.
It's
but
reasonable.
It's just the way he went about it wasn't.
That's what it was. The quest
was
the thrust of Magneto's villainy is his tactics.
Yeah.
The way he chooses to respond to the negative
Like they put
actions against
iron
him.
in the guy's blood and pulled it out of his body, and I remember being like 9 and seeing that and being like, oh.
So I think here's my ruling on this. Let me see if you guys agree. I think Magneto rides the line of villainy throughout. It's a very complex villain, but it rides that line throughout. And the only times where he literally steps over that line and becomes kind of like heroic or what have you is, I think, as James said, a function of the soap opera-like story structure of comic books. They go on forever that eventually people are like, yeah, all right, in this scenario, the bad guy is even worse than Magneto, so Magneto is a good guy. So I wouldn't even consider that an arc, a redemption arc. I just think it's a complex good villain.
Yeah, I think Magneto fails my basic redemption test because at no point that I can ever remember in really any story does Magneto express remorse or an understanding that what he did was wrong.
Oh, that's accurate.
Yeah, absolutely.
He always stands behind his reasoning.
So here's a question for you guys who are more into the X-Men than I am. What about the opposite of this? Where's that good guy that did something really horrible that we've all kind of like swept under the rug or forgotten about?
Cyclops?
Professor X or Cyclops?
I mean, I was gonna say either one of them. They're pretty bad.
Oh God, Professor X. I think it's complicated. In both those situations, you gotta. We're already long on an episode, and I think in both those situations, we've got characters who are portrayed as heroes who've fallen and done something that's specifically bad, and then eventually it's walked back slightly, or in some cases erased, as in it was a mind parasite.
Which happens quite often with Professor X.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But it's a shame because
He's lousy with mind parasites.
because by the nature of Xavier's power, it's inherently kind of evil.
Oh yeah,
so it's hard
shady.
to yeah.
I think it's good, but I think it would be way too much in the weeds if we went into.
yeah.
But let's go with something that's a little less in the weeds, still in the X-Men universe. Let's talk about Emma Frost quickly because I do think she's kind of an opposite of Magneto.
Oh, I absolutely hate the Emma Frost character. I don't think she ever comes anywhere close to a redemption.
Really?
Because all we get with Emma Frost is Emma Frost was a villain from the especially loathsome Hellfire Club. She eventually got a sympathetic backstory tacked on. Where it's like, oh, she was abused when she was young and has just done what she had to do to survive.
Right.
And then everybody just starts treating her like she's a good guy.
That's interesting.
It's like, okay.
I honestly don't know enough about this. I kind of feel, when I piece together, it always feels like other characters are treating her like, Emma's bad, but she's a good guy. And I'm like, what?
But she's here now.
She pretty much just stops being a villain when she wants to be. There's a very weird, nebulous moment where, moments really, where she's like, I'm not this anymore. I'm this now. And
That's a good question.
It's just go ahead.
Oh, so here's my thing, and then this is what I've read in the few comics I've read with Emma Frost as a good guy that surprised me. I always got the impression that maybe she's manipulating people into believing she's a good person, because she is that's kind of her MO. So, and not even lying to people, but literally using her mutant ability to change their minds about her.
I think they've tried to do hand wavium about that, saying, oh, well, you couldn't get past the psychic defenses that are around like that. But I think it's very likely that there's a combination of the two in effect.
That would be very interesting
because she's demonstrated that she's very capable of manipulating people with or without her mental abilities.
I want to put an asterisk on this before we go much further, because I don't think we have enough info on this one, and I know for a fact Emma Frost fans love her in her redemption, and I feel like there's another side to the story that we as non-productive are not saying. This is absolutely true. Maybe it's just the select comics we've read or whatever. And if you have an opinion on this, please leave a comment on this post. We definitely want to hear more about this, because this is something that sounds to me to be a good redemption story, except it never really made sense to me.
I would love to hear the Emma Frost supporters chime in with their wrong opinions.
I definitely feel like this is a thing, though, where we have, let's tack on a tragic backstory to our villain, and that's the redemption of it. We have that sort of in postmodernist characters where we're there were villains in stories, and then we added tragic backstories onto them to attempt to redeem them.
All right.
So I've been thinking about two characters like this. The two that ring true for me on this is Elphaba, right?
Yeah.
We have Wicked, right, which kind of is the tragic backstory of the Wicked Witch of the West that kind of rewrites her thing. And then the most recent Maleficent movie, I think, tries to do this as well.
Right. So these are two really tricky things. First of all, like Michelle mentioned in pre-production, there are two female characters who...
Female characters get rewritten a lot.
Rewritten and not given redemption arcs in original stories.
No.
Nope, you don't get a redemption arc if you're a female character in the original story. You just fall off and die.
You just get a tragic backstory.
Well, you would. That's what the close. I mean, in a way, I'd rather have that than just fall off a cliff and die. But yes,
And
so
I actually appreciate that more than rewriting the original story.
Yeah.
To
I guess.
You know,
yeah. But
okay, I love Wicked's approach to that, especially because it's okay. You know the story. You saw the story from one point of view.
Yeah, now it's
But
from another.
Here's another point of view that doesn't contradict what you knew at all.
yeah, that's good.
Yeah, she still gets to be the Wicked Witch of the West in the movie, but we know that behind the scenes it's
There
all
were other
a part of the
motivations.
plan. There are other motivations that her and
Right.
And that really works well for characters like the Wicked Witch of the West and Maleficent, I think. I mean, it has the potential to work well, at least.
I think
When you have a character that never gets fleshed out in the original material.
Exactly. I think that's why Wicked Witch. And to be perfectly honest, I did not read all of L. Frank Baum's books. Maybe the witch.
She's only in the one.
She died. Yeah. So but because she's such a skeleton of a character, it works out to give her more of a backstory.
I think it works so much better in Wicked to a certain extent because the difference between these, I feel like the stakes are a little bit like it's very heavy-handed in Maleficent, and not in the best way. When her wings get cut off, the allegory is very, very clear, and it's uncomfortable because this is not that type. A, this doesn't feel like it's that type of story, and B, it's just kind of like, how do you like? I'm always going to be sympathetic to her at this point. Like her doing anything villainous, it doesn't matter. This is horrible. And with Wicked, it's like there's complexity to what she's doing. And when she chooses to do something evil, we're, oh, honey, don't do that, but I guess I understand what you're doing, and yeah, that person's horrible.
I think one problem with Maleficent was that it was so much more about what was happening to her and why Wicked works better than Maleficent. It's a lot easier to talk about if you're comparing the two.
Yeah.
So in Wicked, everything is about the choices that Elphaba makes.
And the other
her
characters
goals that she's
around
trying
her as well.
Yeah.
And the way she's reacting to what they do. Whereas stuff just seems to happen to Maleficent. Like, awful stuff happens to her.
She's powerful and does a lot of cool things, but, like, she has no control over being massacred. What's the word am I thinking of?
Maimed?
De-winged?
Maimed was the word I was looking for. Maimed. The reason for her maiming seemed kind of like shoehorned in as a little like
very weird and didn't make a lot of sense.
It was just to make that person super bad.
Yeah.
And even then, they weirdly reframe him and then unframe him. It's very bizarre.
Why she was going to get revenge on a child and then decided not to get revenge on that child, but then grew to love that child. All of it just felt like not well thought out.
Yeah.
Where Wicked, there is a pattern that they've filled through and a narrative thread they held on the entire time.
This brings up a really interesting point. Is there something that can happen to you, something so tragic and awful that it kind of negates all of the future awfulness you might do?
Well, I think that's what people think about Snape.
Boo.
Or most people think about Snape.
But I don't even know if that
Not
really counts.
really.
Let's frame it out.
Yeah.
Snape, we saw him in a bunch of movies or books where he is abusive to Harry, maybe an ally to Harry. It's kind of hard to make out.
He's not just abusive to Harry, he's abusive
Abusive
to
to
like
kids.
almost every student except the Slytherins.
Right, and ultimately ends up killing a headmaster, more or less, and then ends up being on the side of the Death Eaters in this big war until we find out
His tragic backstory, quote unquote.
Quote unquote.
It's tough because there's certainly a lot of reframing that happens in that backstory. There's reframing of James Potter, who we're kind of thought of as maybe a hero at this point. But, it gives this motivation to Snape so centrally on his relationship to Lily that to me, it always brings up the question was Snape ever... where does Snape fall on the line of being good or bad to begin with?
Yeah, I think Pete said that at one point.
Yeah.
He's like, was he ever a villain?
Every piece of his motivation is so central on his love/obsession for Lily that it's weird depending on how you look at it.
If Snape really loved and cared about Lily as a person and not just a female attractive object, he never would have become a Death Eater in the first place, because when they were in their 5th year after their owls, Lily went to him and said, why are you hanging out with McNair and this person and that person, all who become Death Eaters by their own choice?
I'm waiting to give you a bell. Yeah.
And
yes, she confronted him.
He wouldn't have done it if he really was a good person.
That's a big
and
deal.
And he cannot use the excuse of, my father was bad to my mother, as a reason for all of his behavior in the future. And the only reason that he ever decided to confess to Dumbledore was because it was Lily Potter. And that doesn't make him a good person, because if they were overhearing it and they thought it was the Longbottoms, he would have just sat back and let it happen.
Exactly. Like, Snape only really at any point...
It was a two-beller, because it was quite a rant.
Yeah, at any point in time, the only reason he decides to flip to or heel face turn, rather, he decides to do that only to protect Lily, not for any greater good or because he's sorry for what he did or because he thinks he was in the wrong.
I have a question then. Why is that any better or worse than Vader? he kills his boss and whatever, it dies in the process, but to save his kid. It's because if he didn't know he had a kid, he would have been like, "Oh, I don't care."
It's because of the It's because of the way we view the relationship, right? So Vader to his son, there's some sort of natural understanding that Vader will have this sense of duty to his kin. Mm-hmm. It becomes almost weird that Snape. And Snape even clearly has some conflict with it in there too, because Harry's also partially James, who he does not like.
Yeah,
right?
I think it's even more tragic because Snape is doing it for a child that is not his biological kid.
I was going to say something about
that. All right,
that.
go for it, Michelle.
But leading in with that, if Snape truly, really loved Lily, he would have viewed Harry as a continuation of her as a person, and he wouldn't have treated him so poorly throughout the whole book series. And I understand that he had a certain front that he had to hold up, but, he was very specifically cruel towards him and his friends and people like Hermione when her teeth grow big in the 4th book right before the Yule Ball, and he's like, "Oh, I don't see any difference." Like, why has no professor ever been fired from Hogwarts?
I mean, I hate to say it, but as much as I kind of almost understand Snape's relationship with Harry to a certain extent, because this wasn't just the product of Lily, it was the product of his abuser growing up, of the person who tortured him. And there are plenty of people that do have those very complex relationships with the product of those people in their lives. And I'm not saying it makes everything he did fine, but I'm okay with the complexity of the relationship he has with Harry.
I don't think that reaction to Harry makes him a villain.
There are plenty of other things to do that.
Yeah.
And the way he treats the other kids makes him a bad teacher, but he's not.
Yeah. So
he's not a villain.
The idea of the sacrifice here also helps him, right? So maybe for better or for worse, Michelle brings up that maybe he wouldn't have done this sacrifice if it were Neville, but when he finds out it's Harry, he does theoretically commit the rest of that time, the rest of his living life, to following Dumbledore's orders, which, I guess...
That's a whole other kettle of worms.
And undoing, to some extent, some of these wrongs, or at least trying to prevent more wrongs from happening immediately to those people.
I want to try to wrap this up as well, although it's impossible because this one is like a deep emotional thing. I think there's a couple things going on here. One, I think Snape and his cruelty to the kids at the school and whatever is just my opinion, and a lot of people share it. But for me, I justify it because he was in deep cover in a war. Right? And if he had been anything less than Snape, the Death Eater in disguise to these kids, he would be dead and Harry would probably be dead. And we wouldn't be talking right now because Voldemort would be president of the UK. I'm not really sure how that movie was supposed to go, but whatever. I think the much more interesting thing to delve into is him willingly being a Death Eater until it became he's like, oh, I didn't know one of my loved ones would be hurt.
Yeah,
that's I think
the
much bigger one. And we brought it up already. We already brought this up, but I think it's one of those things where like you're chasing too many rabbits. And I don't think for Snape it's really about how he treats Harry and the kids as much as is this guy who just, fell out of fascism because he had a crush on somebody he shouldn't have? And that crush is weird.
It's very weird because it's validated in fiction because it literally changes his soul to and it's weird. It's very complex and it's very bizarre and it's
one of those
extremely problematic.
People still bring up always as a love term.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know.
No, it's not.
I'm not so good on that one. Actually.
But it's so weird to hear that because it was not requited, but it was still validated.
Yeah.
Is that any different than what happened with Dumbledore?
How do you mean?
Well, Dumbledore was on board with
Grindelwald.
The magic Hitler.
I mean, listen, let's be real here. There's a lot that's complex about Dumbledore as far as him maybe even being a bad guy because of him possibly leading Harry just to die. There's a lot that's weird about him. I don't think we need to use him as an example of like a good person in this universe.
So just to
But
wrap,
Dumbledore only turns around because of what happens to his loved one, his sister.
sure. Having something, or Loki, right? I mean, I made the argument that in Dark World, finding out like, oh man, a loved one can get hurt, stops him from trying to take over Midgard to become into the person where he's like, okay, there's consequences to my actions. So I think maybe this is acceptable because if you're looking at redemption the wrong way, if redemption isn't like erasing the past, it's saying you've learned maybe a hard lesson and you will do what it takes to change. And I do think, even though Snape at one point, was a fascist monster, he learned that lesson and he did what it took to change.
To wrap up the idea of villains in the Harry Potter franchise, it's important to remember that there are not just good people and evil people, as Lupin said in, I think, Book 5.
Yes.
I definitely want to take that idea, Frank and Michelle, and jump over into Game of Thrones. I actually really like Theon, and I think the book and his arc encompasses a lot of everything we've just talked about, right? Theon is a jerk when we meet him. He commits atrocious acts. He is horrible. Horrible things happen to him. We have that moment in his story where he truly, in the eyes of the viewer, I guess, repents, right? The moment where he's being tortured and it's like, oh, your father, blah, 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 blah. And he screams, my father died when he was beheaded on King's Landing. The recognition that, that he had made a mistake, he had forsaken the people who loved him, and then he spends the rest of his time, essentially having more awful things happen to him, and then trying to make up for that.
And then watching someone that he loved be harmed. And,
well, and then ultimately, gives his life, right, in the pursuit of making up for what he's done. I think Theon has every element of everything we've talked about here that we're looking for when we're looking for that story.
I mean, he even kills children.
But he killed different children than he was supposed to.
Wondering, the way you framed that, Al, was like he has everything you could look for. He even kills children.
Because it ties back to what we're talking about with Vader.
Yeah. I know what you were aiming for. Saying where you landed.
But he killed children nobody cared about.
Yeah, just village boys, not the king.
Woof. Okay. I'm sorry.
Not the king or the target practice.
But all right.
Oh.
But I will
sad.
piggyback off of James, and I'm like,
better.
I'm gonna say, is it only because of the horrible things that happen to him that make him forgivable, or is it because
it's him realizing?
Because what happens? Because he
so do we
repents.
have a formula? I mean, the last two things we just stumbled upon. We don't have to recap. Yeah. So Snape and Theon may have given us a formula. Which started off with Vader, the genuine repentance. Something happens where you acknowledge, oh, wow, this was bad. I'm a bad guy. And you do stuff about it and you try to stop. Because if you apply this formula for the next few characters, and we're going to do the lightning round, let's see if it works.
Frank, there's another formula, though.
Oh, what's that?
So, just like we saw with Magneto, and you kind of see with Loki too, but we didn't mention it, is Theon doesn't seem so bad once we get introduced to Ramsay Bolton. Just like Magneto doesn't seem so bad when there are worse villains, or Loki doesn't seem that bad when Hela escapes from the underworld and like wrecks everything.
Yeah,
I think that makes for an easier to accept redemption, but not necessarily a truer redemption.
Yeah. I don't even know if that is truly a redemption as much as like the villain kind of thing where you're like, I'm okay with that. It could eventually be used in a way that's helpful, like with Magneto.
Like if there's a real redemption, it's easier to accept when that happens.
Yeah, all right, so let's use this formula in this lightning round. So it's the next character that popped up, Pacifica Northwest from Gravity Falls. Let's use the Theon Greyjoy formula. All right, non-productive.
Well, she only attempted to kill the children.
Let's
God.
teach her how to bark.
That's wow. What? I'm not editing all of this podcast. I can't. I will be here all year.
Oh, no, wait. So Pacifica is introduced as the villain. She's the pompous. She's mean to Mabel.
Typical rich kid.
She has a problem. She comes to them for help. We get elements of her tragic backstory, the awful things that have happened to her, right? Which
Her
doesn't
parents treat her very poorly, and it's high expectations, etc.
She recognizes that she's done something wrong in the haunted house episode. She recognizes the wrong her family has done. Extra bonus on top of that.
She accepts responsibility for that and does what
God.
she can to make restorations for it.
She's involved in the ending of the show as one of the symbolic characters, for whatever that means. And it is a children's show. She does not make the children's show. She does not make the ultimate sacrifice, but I guess it doesn't need to be required.
We could ask Alex if he planned on it. So I think Pacifica Northwest does pass the Snape Greyjoy formula.
Let's do it with Regina George.
Regina George is next. Let's do Regina George. Talk us through Regina George, Michelle, from Mean Girls, correct?
Okay, yes, Regina George from Mean Girls. Typical Mean Girl, not great. Very uninvolved family, other than Amy Poehler trying to offer her alcohol. Something bad happens to her. She gets hit by a bus, and then she changes her lifestyle.
Ultimate sacrifice.
Ultimate sacrifice.
Wait, did she die in Mean Girls?
No, she doesn't.
That's the joke,
That's
though.
the joke.
Oh,
so they're like, and then she died. Just kidding, but she got really hurt. And she started using all of her, not really, I guess, vicious attitude into playing lacrosse.
Oh, all right.
And got really good at it.
You tell me, does this pass the Snape
I don't-
Greyjoy formula?
I don't know if it
It's
does.
questionable, but
Questionable.
But she's relatable to Pacific Northwest.
All right.
Rich girl.
So here's our last one we're going to be focusing on today. Spike from Buffy.
I 100% think that he
Oh, he
qualifies for
passes
this.
it.
Even more so than Angel does in that show. And there's a great scene between him and Angel where, like, literally they're fighting over the
amulet thing.
Yeah, and he says to him, like, you were cursed with a soul. I didn't have one, and I went through hell to get one. And, like, yeah, dude, if you, without the conscience to do this, decided, I'm going to do it. I'm going to, yeah.
He's a bad guy. He does atrocious things. He recognizes he has a sad life. He begins to repent. He, works with the heroes and begins, changing his ways. In season 8, he makes the ultimate sacrifice, blocking off the door to hell. And since Angel went on one more season, he got an epilogue.
Doesn't he get resurrected? In Angel?
Yeah, in
He
Angel.
does.
That's
Yeah, Angel
right.
gets resurrected.
I need one point clarified because I don't remember. How did Spike get his soul?
Yeah.
He went through the demon trials.
Mm-hmm.
He essentially literally went to hell and went through torture and
Okay.
pain and suffering
And
to get
why?
his soul back.
So
Because he wanted it back.
I think part of the reason,
Well, why did he want it back?
because he fell in love with Buffy.
Okay.
That's
where
So-
wrinkle.
When I
Yeah,
hear
it's a
people
slight
complain
wrinkle.
about this, first of all, it's in the spectrum of the Buffy verse
Buffyverse.
where you've got Angel who gets a soul. Thank you. Who has Angel who gets a soul because
Of a curse.
a curse, and it he loses it when he loves somebody. It's very stupid. Right?
Yeah,
So Spike's is probably at least equally stupid, maybe a little less stupid. But it still feels like your motivation is worse than Snape's. I'm not going to be a fascist wizard anymore because my girlfriend got hurt. Not even my girlfriend, the girl I'm stalking.
I think it's also important to remember that in season 3, he gets captured by the science dudes, and they put the chip in his head. That basically, and I forgot about the whole timeline of things a little bit and was
He
refreshing
can't,
myself.
attack people,
Where,
right?
yeah, he can't hurt people.
This
If
is
he
Spike?
hurts people,
Yeah.
he's got the chip in his brain. That's basically if he hurts people, and he was tortured while he was held by them too, he will feel like immense pain if he hurts anybody. And I think that kind of, I want to say, nudges him into slowly starting to become a better.
Torture by reconditioning. I think this fits the theory on Greyjoy.
There we go. Exactly.
Well, it depends. I think there are. So here's what I vaguely remember from this show is that while there was a lot of like trappings that was geeky, like stupid, like, oh, I fell in love with Buffy and I went through the Wizard's Cup of Demons. I don't even know. And then somebody put a chip in my brain. All that stuff happened. The character gets a chance to actually say, you know, I've been thinking about this and I actually feel like I made mistakes in the past. And there is definitely moments where Spike says that, even if that's motivated by a chip in the brain or a love triangle or whatever. He does acknowledge. It's like he's acknowledging it in a teenage soap opera. So there's got to be some
rough,
goofiness.
but you get the broad strokes of it.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah. I'm not sure.
Not sure either.
That really qualify. And I don't know if this applies in the case of Spike or Angel, but I think if you essentially have a conscience thrust upon you against your will, that doesn't really qualify you for a redemption. This happened, if I remember correctly, to Sabretooth in the X-Men comic books.
Oh God!
Where
circle back.
He essentially got a conscience thrust onto him, and he joined the good guys, and felt awful about all the things that he did. But the second that condition was reversed, he immediately started just being an animal and murdering people again.
I think it's complicated because sometimes it's used as a narrative crutch. That the whole thing about you have a soul now is, I mean, imagine Star Wars with Vader right before he saves Luke. Someone says, "I give you the Force soul," and he's like, "My Force soul is back," and then it's just garbage.
Really does take a lot of weight off,
right?
It.
Or even if you do the latest trilogy, where it's because of the Force dyad that what's his face thinks.
What would have been interesting would be if Vader had encountered C-3PO at one point, and seeing him reminded him of his childhood on Tatooine.
Oh, man.
Oh my God, what have I done?
It would have been
3PO.
Amazing. The same scene in Return of the Jedi with Luke and the Emperor and Vader, but C-3PO. Vader lifts up the Emperor and throws him down. It's like, and it runs to 3PO's side and he's melted. I want
Master
that
Anakin.
made. All right, last thing. We're going full circle now, legitimately.
Wait, so does Spike pass the test?
I don't know.
We're not sure.
It's a hung jury.
Okay.
Hung jury. If you know, because you have recently rewatched Buffy or even Angel, please leave us a comment in the post. We want to hear this. I'm sure someone with fresh eyes on the subject matter can run the Snape Greyjoy test and let us know. But all right, so now full circle back to Star Wars and Kylo Ren. Let's run Kylo Ren through the Snape Greyjoy test. He, in Rise of Skywalker, on the Death Star, battling Rey, the moment his mother calls out to him, and he has a scene with his father's ghost. There is a moment where, and he has been struggling for this for the entire trilogy. He is unsure of himself to the point where he feels like he's completely lost. He doesn't know what to do. And at that moment when he's talking to Han Solo, like there's a I love you exchange, and I know, and I think he legitimately questions why he's doing any of this at the death of his mother. And it's as self-serving as Snape questioning being a Death Eater once he finds Lily dead.
Which is what I think goes back to what I was saying before. How does this necessarily even qualify? Because maybe, because he's as nebulous as Snape, if to the point of...
Well, I think we came out...
I think it's different than Snape, because I think it's much more nebulous than Snape. Snape makes a decision.
Right.
Like a definitive,
fair.
This is my final decision. I don't think we ever get any evidence that Kylo Ren makes a final decision here.
Oh, that's fair.
I know what it is.
This is where he lands when he dies.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I think I know what it is.
Yeah.
And that's what I actually even complained about in Rise of Skywalker. There's a scene where Kylo Ren throws his lightsaber and gives it all up, it seems, until he immediately shows up to fight more people, kill more people with a new lightsaber. It's that scene, that transition from, why am I doing this? I'm just going to give it all up. The sacrifice isn't there.
Yep.
Yeah.
He gives up his life, but also it doesn't hold the same amount of weight as Snape, who literally spends the rest of his life trying to make up for what he's done.
It's not clear that Kylo Ren actually wouldn't have done what he did anyways in the last act of that movie.
Kylo Ren follows the wishes of whoever last whispered in his ear.
Yeah, he doesn't lose anything by giving it up, right?
Like,
if you compare him to Theon in that last bit, right? It's, Theon starts to rebuild his life. He starts to come back from his torture. He develops a relationship with Sansa. He puts on the armor again. He gets to fight with, Jon Snow, his adopted brother. Like, he has something to lose. Kylo Ren doesn't. He was just about to say, like, I have nothing to lose. And then he was like, oh, cool, I still have nothing to lose. But hey, more fighting.
He definitely dies fighting, but, he dies. But it's unclear that is something he wouldn't have done anyways.
Yeah.
Except for literally giving his life force for Rey, which, I don't know. There's so much in that scene that pulls you out.
Even Vader has something to lose, right? At this point, we're very aware of the relationship that Vader has with his son. The whole conflict of, the Emperor and Vader and Luke is to have Luke join him. Like, that's what Vader is giving up, right? A continued relationship with his family, right? Like, even Vader in that small amount of time has something to lose. Kylo doesn't seem like he does.
Yeah. So it's an interesting formula, and it's complicated to do a villain redemption. I would love to do this with like another 24 villains, but we're out of time, and we have to pay our sponsors, and our sponsors are Animal Crossing's New Leaf. That's right, it's coming out in a few weeks.
New Leaf, New Horizons.
I don't know, man. They're not really a sponsor. You
Get
give us
it
a free
right.
copy.
We don't have that Nintendo money.
Can Animal Crossing ever be redeemed?
Well, we are doing our March Madness competition right now in the Facebook fan club. Please join us on facebook.com/group/nonpro or facebook.com/nonpro. We're also on Twitter and Instagram, but no one is actually commenting that much there because they think we're insane. My hashtags are not useful. Al, you have one thing to say to wrap us up?
I will say, if you like what we did here today and you want us to try and continue to go through more villains like Frank says, I think comment and let us know and see if we want to approach the subject again, because I can think of one villain that I know does all of these things and doesn't work.
Oh,
We're doing this.
All right. You got to spoil
Hey,
it.
anime doesn't count.
No,
You
save
don't
for
want
the
to
next
tease it?
episode.
You don't want to tease it?
Anime doesn't count.
I'm not speaking about this specifically. I'm just in general.
He was just planning on saying that sentence anyways.
Yeah.
All right.
Good night, everybody.
This has been a non-productive media presentation. Executive producer Frank Hablawi. This program and many others like it on the Non-Productive Network is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives license. Please share it, but ask before trying to change it or sell it. For more information, visit non-productive.com.